It's so good to see you and meet you, even if virtually. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pilgrim.
Thank you for arranging this conversation.
Absolutely. I'm really thrilled. And I'm really excited about the fact that we will have an opportunity to come together. I'd like to dive into the conversation. I know we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So I would love for you to kindly introduce yourself and speak about museum, the work that brought you to the museum, the passion that continues to advance your efforts, and ultimately what you hope to achieve. This is really informal. It's a chat. It's a way for us to learn about you, the work that you do, and also I'll help those who are listening to connect the dots to what you do in your museum to our latest exhibit at the Calaboose African American History Museum. So please take it away and talk for as long as you want.
Well, thank you. I was born in Harlem, but had a little family drama, so got raised or reared in Alabama from the age of 1. And by the time I got there, that was nearing the end of the Jim Crow period. Grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and Mobile was rigidly and thickly racially segregated in those days. Quite frankly, it still is. Went to an all-black elementary school, Bessie C. Fondale Elementary School. And then right after that, my family moved to Pritchard, Alabama, which is an adjoining city, even more segregated than Mobile was. And I grew up, long story short, I grew up in an all-black church, for the most part, all-black schools, all-black neighborhoods, and the like. My first memory of a racist object was I was at a flea market carnival hybrid, and a dealer was selling what you would probably call Mammy salt and pepper shakers. Bought one, broke it. I don't know why I did that, other than I just didn't like it. I didn't break the second piece or the third piece, and I don't even remember the second or the third piece, but I just remember always having this stuff. Went away to historically black college, Jarvis Christian College out in Hawkins, Texas. And it was there, I had a small collection by then, but it was there that I really started to understand the power of an object as a teaching tool. One of my teachers, Dr. O.C. Nix, came to class one day and he had a chauffeur's cap. And he set it down and asked, what does this have to do with Jim Crow? And we gave him the answers that you would expect us to give, which is that during the Jim Crow period, African-American men and women, but in this case, men were relegated to a race-segregated job economy. And so they'd either work in a field or be a butler or a chauffeur. And he says, no, that's not the right answer. And so we took turns giving him versions of the same answer. And each time he just said, no, that's not the answer I'm looking for. And finally, he said something that was pivotal in my development. He said, if you were an African-American professor in the 1930s or 40s, you had a little money and you might want good things just like other people. So you want a nice home, you want clothes, you want a nice car maybe. But if you were driving a nice car through rural Texas, which is where the school was, and you were stopped, you could have been beaten or killed for having a new car. And so that chauffeur's cap became a way of saying, this is not my car. I'm not a threat to you. I know my place. And I thought, wow, that is so powerful. And if he could use a chauffeur's cap to teach such a profound lesson about what life was like during Jim Crow, then my collection, which was growing a little bit at the time, I should be able to do what he had done with that chauffeur's cap and maybe more. Left there, went to Ohio State, which was a real shock to me. I mean, Jarvis was a small, I think we had like 500 or 600 students. It was, basically an all Black school. And then I left there and went to Ohio State, which had over 60,000 students. And most of them were white, and there was just a level of freedom. I mean, I used to joke that I felt like I had gone to Sodom and Gomorrah, because people were like, partying at a level that I didn't know was possible. But being there, I got involved in I was a sociology major, but I got involved in, with the Black Studies department. And I'd always been an avid reader of what's called African American history. But I really became an avid reader when I was there. And then got my master's and PhD there, came to Ferris after a stop or two, got to Ferris State University. And by that time, my collection was it was over 3,000, so probably close to about 3,500 pieces. I donated them to the institution with the understanding that they would be preserved and displayed. And so they gave me a really tiny room. It was basically just visual storage. It was 500 square feet. Like I said, it was a tiny room, but it was powerful because it was so tiny, because you couldn't escape. There were just so many pieces in such a small space. And I used it for my classroom, where I taught courses on race relations, courses that were not taught by me, but maybe had a focus on race relations. I started letting those teachers use the room. And then eventually the word got out. I think it was 2001, the Detroit Free Press did a story. I think that was our first, story. And then it got picked up by the Associated Press. And anyway, long story short, it took until 2012 for the museum to move into a museum proper. And so we, in 2012, we opened in our current location, which it's still not large enough. It's about 3,500 square feet, but we've had people come from all over the world. We have people that are making documentaries, people that are doing research. We have civil rights groups, we have human rights groups, we have police departments, we have groups of politicians, corporate leaders, and others who come, and we're really trying to have meaningful discussions about race relations, and racism. But now we're too small again. I mean, we receive now thousands of pieces each year from the public. And so we have, I don't know, I think we're displaying, 8,000 or 9,000 pieces. We probably have at least that many pieces that are in storage. And we have thousands of pieces we haven't even processed. And so we've decided that there are a couple stories we need to tell that we don't currently tell because we don't have the space, and that the stories we tell need to be expanded. But we also need proper archival and storage spaces. And so we've begun a campaign to raise $15 million to move into a standalone building right at the entrance of campus.
That's tremendously impressive. And there's so much I want to go back to. I was taking notes as you were talking, just because there are so many critical points. I think one of the first things that I think is interesting is also related to the fact that you are from Harlem originally. And I must say, What's that?
I said I was born there, but I'm really from Mobile.
Okay, born in Harlem. Well, I have to say that my roots and a large number of my family members are at what most Harlemites know as 38th and Fifth Avenue, which is really 138th and Fifth Avenue. So the Schaumburg is right there at 135th.
Right.
And for those of us that have a familiarity with the landscape, can appreciate the richness and the importance of accessing the Black history experience and the narratives that are housed in one place. Because the challenge is so many of those stories, so many of those narratives are not integrated into our public school education and just daily curriculum. So I think there is not only a moral imperative, but quite frankly, a principled duty to maintain an effort where you have something like the museum at Ferris State, where folks of all walks in life, all walks of life, not just academics, but younger learners, families, as you said, law enforcement, everyone from all over the world can access this information to better their understanding. One of the things that you stated was, and I'm familiar with Mobile because my aunt is from Mobile. As a matter of fact, she's there now. And I think it is impossible. I was born in Florida, grew up between Texas and New York City. And one of the things that I want to know if you agree with, Dr. Pilgrim, is that it is impossible to divorce one's understanding of race relations and the construction of race in their own development and understanding of difference and oppression and social position when born in the South, or at least when growing up in the South. What is your feeling about that?
I think I probably agree with that because I'm actually writing the last book I'm going to ever write. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is how different my life would have been had I not left Harlem as a 9-month-old to be reared in the South. I mean, especially not just the South, in Mobile. I mean, Mobile's about as southern as you can get. When you leave Mobile, you're in the water. That's the end of the country. So, and it has a long and quite frankly, funky, nasty tradition or history of racial brutality. So growing up in that environment, yeah, it certainly shaped the way that I see race, the way that I see a lot of things. I'll give you an example. I used to, when I was a little boy, probably 8 or 9, we would sit, there was like a little store, and old men would gather on the porch of the store, and they would tell lies. In other words, tell stories, but we called them telling lies. But when you're 8 or 9 years old, you think they're telling the truth. And so there's a story I write about, which is, they told me the story of Cleotis Threadgill. And he was a nice, decent guy, hardworking, Christian guy, mind his own business. But he's growing up he was working in the 1950s in Alabama. And so he got cheated by his boss. He was picking pecans, and basically he, like I said, he got cheated, and so he in a mild way complained. Well, his white boss, sent him home, and then Cleotis was told by his friends, "You better get out of here." And he was like, "I didn't do anything wrong. What's the problem?" And they were like, "No, you need to go. You need to just get in your raggedy car and get out of here." So he went out on Telegraph Road, and they even used Telegraph Road, which is an actual road in the story. So of course, as a child, I'm really listening, right? And then he got out in his old car, and he sees a car full of white men coming toward him, and he's scared, and so their car starts chasing his car. His car stops, and he gets out and he runs, and they can't catch him. And they were so angry because they meant to hurt him. They meant to do very bad things to him. And they were so angry that he had gotten away that they lynched his car. Now, if you're 9 years old, you don't know what an urban legend is. You don't know what an object lesson is or whatever. But it's pretty clear to me now that, first of all, Pritchard and Mobile had lynchings, real lynchings. There were lynchings on blocks near where I grew up, although they were they were slightly before. One was in 68, but there were ones before that. This was those men's way, this was their way of making sense of such a horrific crime, but it was also a way of telling a young boy, you need to be careful in your interactions with people that don't live in this community. So I don't know. I'm assuming that that's we hear people talk about the talk. Well, in a sense, that was a version of the talk. 40 years ago. Just basically in story form, illustrating to me that very bad things can happen. In interacting with white people. That's a hard lesson. So that's an example of growing up in the South. But on the flip side, growing up in the South, I was used to seeing Black people in positions of respect. So the principal of my high school was Black. The assistant principal was Black. The preacher in the church where I went was Black. The guy that owned the nightclub was Black. The guy that, because we lived in a Black world. And so that's the other side. And then when, I don't know what term you want to use, but when integration came, it was often the Black institutions that suffered, in terms of ending, if you would. So yeah, that's a very long answer to your question. I definitely think that, growing up in the South, especially the Deep South, it of course shapes the way you see race.
That wasn't at all long-winded. It was perfect. And I think it was comprehensive in its effort to underscore exactly that. There is a duality, I think, to our education socially and politically around having a Southern experience as it relates to race. I also think, and I'd like to ask you this question, particularly as it relates to your collection and the work that you're doing around preservation. Certainly you're aware of the more recent controversy. I always say there's a before May 25th and an after May 25th when Mr. George Floyd was murdered. Mm-hmm. And it was another murder captured on video. Mm-hmm. But I will say, interestingly enough, for whatever reason, and I know we all have our theories about why, maybe it was the perfect storm of the pandemic, folks were forced to pay attention as a consequence of being at home and attending to things in a different way. But for whatever reason, there has been this groundswell around action, or dare I say response, that's probably a bit more appropriate, from corporations who profess a desire to be more conscientious mm-hmm. Around race and race relations, representation, and now, as it is aligned most specifically with your collection, racist iconography. Mm-hmm. So in that, Aunt Jemima, though she's iterations of her brand, from the head rag in the apron to the pearls in the permed or relaxed hair, mm-hmm. and Uncle Ben, there's been, those icons are being thrown out. There's been apologies made. They're deciding that the brand is injurious, and they're now removing those. So I want to ask you, number one, it's kind of a two-part question. Number one, do you think the removal of racist iconography in an effort to rebrand is actually going to better or further our collective understanding in the United States around race? That's the first part. And the second part is, do you think we risk losing our generational memory and thus effort to better understand history and the impact of history in the present as a consequence of the removal of these images as part of our history and social consciousness?
Yeah, so I wanted to give you a short answer and say to the first one, I don't know, and to the second one, probably, but I won't do that. I will, the museum, you use the term preserve, and that is true. I think it's slightly more accurate to say that we document. And to the spirit of what you just said, I think it's important to document because people have forgotten, and often out of their ignorance, assume that a certain thing did not occur unless you can show them evidence. So yeah, there is that, but I have to weigh that. I have to weigh that against, in my opinion, the benefit of removing racist imagery from, it's kind of like with the monuments. It's a little bit of a parallel. Obviously, there are some differences, but we've had at least two, maybe three cities where the people offered or asked if we would be interested in housing, one of the monuments. And so it led to, first of all, we don't have the space now. We will when we move into the other facility, but and the optics are bad on that, in terms of having them. But that would be a power in showing one of these monuments and then telling the history of how white Americans tried to reinstitute not just white supremacy, but white domination. And how these monuments were really monuments to those efforts. So back to the, I guess you would say the less, I don't know if it's less controversial or not, things like Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. And what I would say, we've been talking about Aunt Jemima for years. I offered some advice to the company years ago that they did not. For example, I suggested that Aunt Jemima be allowed to eat with the family. I mean, I've been around Black people my whole life. Black folks eat. And they were like, no, she shouldn't get to eat with the family. I was like, well, what about the smile? Not all Black people are smiling all the time. And even talked about her name a little bit, especially the aunt, not the Jemima part, but the aunt part. Couldn't get them to change that. In the museum itself, though, typically our approach is not to tell, although the activist in me has to be careful because the activist is always screaming, tell them what's right, tell them what's right, tell them what's right. But, the more facilitator in me or docent in me takes kind of a visual thinking approach, which is to ask a person, what is it you see? And if you have a group of 6 or 8 people, you sometimes will get multiple, perspectives on what you see. And so, for us, Aunt Jemima it's almost indispensable as a teaching tool. Most people, when they see an object that has, that's heavily caricatured or that has a racial slur in it, they just say, okay, this is vulgar, this is coarse, we don't need, but there's no discussion after it because we're all in agreement. If you take something like Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, to some extent, even things like Little Black Sambo or Little Brown Cocoa, those children's books, you have people who have nostalgic, and I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean, they actually have good memories of those products, It makes them think about their parents or grandparents and time spent with them. And for someone else like myself, it makes me think about the vestiges of enslavement and segregation. And so having a discussion, because that's what the museum really is. I mean, it's a space where we can really talk about what it is we see. And again, I've always had a struggle between, and that's why I'm having a struggle answering your question, because there's the facilitator, and then there's the activist. And the facilitator is just trying to create a space where people feel safe to share opinions, including ones that me, the activist, does not agree with. But then on the other hand, I'm not going to let someone say some dumb stuff either. You know what I mean? And so there is the constant pushing and, well, what about this? And have you thought about this? Well, you may not know this, but, so it's very conversation driven. It's a cliche, but I do believe in the triumph of dialogue. I'm not trying to crush people, but I am trying to get them to think more deeply about race relations, and racism. And Aunt Jemima, I don't need it to be in the store for me to teach that lesson, but I do need to have a can or a box in front of me, if that makes sense. I don't need, and you know what? Sometimes it backfires anyway. Like we had a cookie jar, and it was part of a set. So there's like 8, and they were all animals. And so one was a horse, and it made the horse sound, and one was a elephant, and then one was an alligator. And when you opened the mouth of the alligator, it said, "Them show is some tasty cookies." And it was an alligator using what was supposedly a Black dialect, and it tapped into the whole history of representation of Black people as food for alligators. And so I had bought a couple of those, and the executives from one of the huge stores, I think it was about 8 of them, the executives, they came to the museum. And I said, well, I'm going to show you something. And so I opened the mouth of the alligator, and it made that, foolish rant. And they were like, wow, this is really bad. I mean, especially because I just before that showed them like 100 pieces, which showed alligators supposedly, eating Black children, or, so I had just showed them that. And then I showed it, and they were like, wow, that looks modern. And I was like, yeah, it's modern. And we have a section on objects made in the last 10 years. And I said, yeah. And I said, hey, you know what? This is being sold in your stores, right? So, I mean, it was not a week later before they took those out of all their stores. So here I am feeling really great. Like I'm Mr. All-American activist. That may even be an oxymoron there. But anyway, but the fact is, the objects weren't destroyed. They just went to other stores, or they went on the secondary market, but they weren't destroyed. And so for us, I mean, my personal view has always been, with a lot of these objects, they should either be destroyed or placed in learning environments. The fact of the matter is that they're often not. And I'll take that back. If you have Aunt Jemima in a store, or Uncle Ben's, or Aunt Sally, or some of the old stuff, it's still in a learning environment. I mean, it's still teaching people, right? I mean, when I walk through the aisles and I see the depictions of African Americans as one-dimensional caricatures who've been flattened into a dimension that's not even necessarily positive, and they're not full people. I mean, even if I see it in a store, it's still teaching. That is, in my lifetime, the most convoluted answer I've ever given to a question. So
not at all. It makes sense. And these, quite frankly, I mean, I think we should all be dubious around offering simple answers to such
Mhm.
historically complex and complicated questions. I think we're evolving. I think a degree of consciousness that we have as a collective is evolving. Hopefully, I don't know if that's naive to say, but I'm daring to hope
Yeah, yeah.
with bated breath, but I'm daring to hope.
Well, I was happy. I have to be honest with you. First of all, I was shocked. I actually was. I don't know if I was stunned.
Uh-huh.
I was shocked because I had had dealings with that company for many years. We had those discussions, and you just assume that, obviously the representation had changed over the years. I mean, it went from a really harsh caricature when it first started to someone who basically looks like my aunt. So I get that, but I had given up. I have to be honest with you. I just didn't even think that was going to happen, and then that led to, another company and another. And you're right. The social justice movement, this current iteration, because we've had social justice movements in this country almost from the beginning. This one set off by that brutal murder of George Floyd. I think it has challenged people. It has challenged all of us to look at not just corporations, but also corporations, to look at the way that race is, that it manifests itself, and to not just look at white supremacy, to not just look at white privilege, and to not even just look at white supremacy, but to also look at white domination and what that means. And so I think it's good. I mean, now it's not enough, but it's, when it first came out, I was telling someone, at first I thought it was like a trickle, you just get although you need little victories. I mean, if you do activism, you need some victories in this world, right? And so I thought, well, this is just a trickle. And then it started feeling like a fast train coming, because it wasn't just, an important, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it wasn't just a set of symbolic gestures by a few corporations. More and more churches were sitting down and talking, and corporations and police departments and having the discussions, quite frankly, that they should have been having all along, and putting some resources in it like they should have been doing all along, and critiquing themselves, like looking around the table saying, why is it that everybody at this table looks like this cut? I don't want to, it looks the same. Let's just put it that way. And so I think in that sense it's very good, but I also believe this, and you kind of alluded to this earlier. All social movements, in retrospect, you can go back and say, oh, they should have done this a little different, or they should have done that a little different. But I'm very proud of and encouraged by the young people in this movement. And quite frankly, when it comes to social injustice, they're not having it. And so I'm excited about that. Now I'm not expecting. I'm not expecting the whole nation to change, but it is being critiqued. It's being critiqued harshly, and I think rightly so. And you gave. I think you're probably right about the fact that people were inside because COVID. That it had greater attention. Also, it was George Floyd's death was so horrific, and it was video and all of that. But I think there's something else too, and that is, for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been hearing a level of racial rhetoric that I heard growing up in Alabama. So I grew up when George Wallace was governor, and Wallace has been reborn, and I'm hearing some of that same, and other people have been hearing that same rhetoric. So I think it's in response to that also.
You really helped me to think about. Could you hold on 1 second? I'm sorry about that, Dr. Pilgrim. My apologies. Back to my point. Actually, it was a point that you were making that I thought really was poignant, and something around which I'm reflecting, and undoubtedly a lot of museums and educators, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, because we are obviously educators. To your point, we document. I love that. Our responsibility is not only to preserve, but to document. And I do think there is a degree an intuitive degree of activism in daring to document, because there is something, there's a degree of courage that I think one must possess, particularly as an institution, to document a piece of history, a part of history that is controversial, that has been often hidden for so long. So I think in that respect, we are subversive. Whether folks are aware or not, we are subversive in that way. And I think that is activist work at its core. I would like to ask this question. With the digital, I guess you could say, digital realm, digital universe, and the way that our younger learners are experiencing the world, which is virtually, and for many, it's replacing almost any in all interpersonal engagement that they've had. And quite frankly, as one who is not a digital native, this presents a bit of cognitive dissonance for me, because I remember I was in college when I got my first cell phone. So I have a long history of life without having that device ready, on the ready for me myself. But I wonder how we can continue to stay relevant as museums, particularly museums that focus on the preservation and documenting of African American history. And we know, for better and worse, it waxes and wanes. There's an ebb and flow, and I'm talking about beyond the microcosm of our communities, of interest in our institutions. How might we advance the engagement with intention, to capture the interest, the activism, the interrogation of young folks, not just those who are coming in our spaces and institutions with their families, but those who have the independent choice to visit? How do we do that? How do we maintain a degree of relevance, where they understand that by, and I'll quote you, I think, through your professor at Jarvis, which was the power of objects as a teaching tool, that there is something that can happen through learning to look and looking to learn.
Yeah. So one of my old students, or former students, Khalid El Hakim, he actually went and started the Black, what's it called? The Black History 101 Mobile Museum. And early on, it was actually a mobile museum.
I know him. He was at NCORE, or has often come to NCORE, the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. Yeah. Excellent, by the way. Excellent.
If you listen to him, I'm the reason that he started that. And it's a long story, but anyhow, we're good friends. But what he was trying to do was to answer your question. And he and I talk about it all the time. You know, at that time, he was in Detroit. And, you know, nationwide, a lot of Black and brown kids don't go to museums. And in Detroit, especially in the poorer sections, almost no Black kids go to the museum. And museum life is such an integral part of some of the other students in the Detroit area. So he had this idea. He took this huge trailer and start traveling into Black neighborhoods to share it. So he does a scaled down version of that now. I don't know nationwide how practical that is as an answer to your question. I know this much, and my museum is not really a space for very young people. I mean, I believe people should be talking about race from the time they learn words, but that doesn't mean they should be in a space as confrontational, as direct as the facility that we have. But for the young people, like high school students who do come to the museum, I think that if I can just get them in the door, they don't want to leave, because they're seeing things. And I do believe with all, and when we move into the new place, we'll have all the cool digital. We're going to do holograms and virtual reality and, virtual sites that allow people real time experiences in the museum. We're going to do all of that, but there is a power. I still believe, of course, I'm an old man, but I still believe that there is a power in objects, and there's a power in teaching, and that it doesn't have to be a negative object. I mean, it can be a positive object, but we have to find ways to make that a part of Black and brown communities, and so, like here in Grand Rapids, that the public museum just got like a $10 million grant to create a museum school for kids who are basically elementary and junior high kids. And it's the coolest thing around. And of course, me and a bunch of other people are making sure that poor kids, whatever their race, and that Black and brown kids are a part of that experience, So, but that was not something, I don't know about you, but now I go to museums all the time now, just because I want to appropriate or learn from something with shelving or color schemes or, casing or whatever. But when I was a kid, museums were not a part of my experience. They just weren't. And I think that my biggest hope in terms of answering your question deals with virtual reality. It just blows my mind and I've been looking at some models. Actually, our institution, Ferris State University, has virtual reality. That's one of the areas that we're working on. And so I'm hoping to be able to find some way to bring the discussion, to bring the objects to younger people. But I'll go back to this, there's no sacrifice for getting young people into museums. And I don't know what the property situation is. Where are you living?
We live, the museum in terms of
what your county, what county do you live in?
Hayes County.
Hayes. So I don't know what your property tax situation is, but in some places in your property tax is a fee, and that then entitles you and your family to attend all parks, all museums, all those facilities. I don't remember that, being the case. And I'll give you a case where it is. I know it's St. Louis, for example, that, no matter what your family, class, financial, whatever situation is, kids can go to museums. Like, same thing, we have a place here, Kalamazoo area, where, anybody can go. I would love to see museums. It's probably impractical, but, nobody charges you to get in a library. And so I would love to see that if we could get there.
I think that's a fantastic point. And I don't think it's far-fetched, because here's what I believe, Dr. Pilgrim. To your point, I think when we have, and I lived in Europe for several years as well. I've always been different. Like I loved going into libraries, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Never Ending Story. It came out in the early 80s. It was about this young kid that essentially gets locked in a bookstore. Oh. And that was like my dream. That was not horrifying at all for me. To get locked in overnight in like a bookstore or a library, are you kidding? Like that's the sweetest deal. So I've always loved, probably to the chagrin of some of my teachers, but my parents, thankfully, they amused me. I prefer to be in a library or in a museum than I did outside to play. That was my play, imaginative play in a lot of ways. And to your point, quite frankly, but I was also really fortunate in the sense that both of my parents were educators. Both of my aunties on both sides were educators. Both of my uncles were educators. And so, and my great aunt and uncle were educators. And so in that sense, there was this, I guess you can say, I was imbued and infused with a sense of curiosity which allowed me the privilege to not contemplate whether or not I had access to it, if that makes sense.
It does.
What I do know, I taught in Newark for years. I taught in New York City and Inwood and Washington Heights. What I do know is even in New York City, for example, where there's programs where a lot of museums are free, a lot of the cultural institutions are free for K through 12 kids, and there are even coupons where they can go to operas at the Met and things like this for a super discounted price. What happens is, and I'll use this term subversively, but also to articulate the problem, right, of this dominant, this white dominance. They don't trickle down to our neighborhoods. So, for example, the majority of institutions, certainly not all, we got the Brooklyn Museum, we've got the Bronx Museum, but I will say in terms of clusters, they're in Manhattan. But there's a whole lot of Black and brown kids, or I would even dare I say the majority of Black and brown families, lower SES families, live in the boroughs. And so it is an effort around access to get train fare, to go downtown. Do you know what I mean? To find childcare if there's children there, if there are children that are too young to go into those spaces. And I think these are considerations that I wish institutions would intuitively reflect upon. It's one thing to have them available at the desk. It's another thing if you are making sure that they're in all schools. So that at PTA meetings, all families can get those. Are you going to suspend bus fare for a few hours on one Saturday a month? So that's not something that impedes access. And I really believe, and I don't doubt, dare I say, I don't doubt you disagree, that curiosity is so inherent to learners. That if given access, if they can get there, I think they would spend hours there. Because they don't see it at school. I think that's the other part. Even children who don't necessarily like the rigid structure of in-class learning tend to find a different experience in museum spaces. I'll put it this way. Let me correct that. In decolonial museum spaces, because there are some very colonial museum spaces.
There are. One thing we didn't get to touch on, but I have a concern about people who were collectors like myself. Years ago, there was actually an organization of us. I don't even remember, Black Memorabilia Association, I think it was called, and you had to have 1,000 pieces to be in there. And it's a lot of people have passed on now, but the reason I mention it is because some of the best museum type situations that I've ever been in were in people's basements, are in their, barns, out attached to the home. And it's really sad in a way because they couldn't find homes. Now, some of them, of course, wanted to sell their collections for a lot of money, and that's what they wanted to do, and nobody would buy them. They passed away, and then their kids sell the stuff, pennies on the dollar back out into the market. And there's a couple of cases that made national news where people just had these large collections of lifetime collections of Black related objects. I mean, I'm serious. Some of these are just fantastic collections, right? And there's no space. We have not made space for that in this country. So, that's Khalid is an exception, because he's found a way to manage his own collection. Someone like, Mr. Schomburg found a way, right? Charles Wright with the Charles Wright Museum found a way. But there's got to be some way that, because, we're losing so much all the time. Every day, people that lived in the Jim Crow period are dying. They're taking their stories with them. So we're losing that. We lose, like I said, we've had people who did the work of historians. They did the work of archives. Now, they weren't trained sometimes, right? So maybe they didn't do it perfectly, but they collected and in their own way documented. I mean, I've been in people's homes where they basically recreated like a Jim Crow, waiting room. I've been in places where people, I'm just trying to think of her name. She wrote Your Negro Tourist Guide. She's from Cincinnati. I hope she's still alive. I know she was ill, but anyway, very, I don't think she would disagree with me saying a very direct writer. And of course, now I'm not remembering her name, but anyway, her whole home was a museum. So, and again, every time I'm in someone's space like that, it just reinforces, the power that these objects have. So the trick is, not just finding ways to bring museums to our young people, but to find ways to honor the work that's being done by individuals and communities who did the work that should have been being done or being supported by others and never was.
I really appreciate that, and that's such a critical question, and so I'd like to ask you, how might corporations, institutions, because I do believe there is, along with this groundswell around collective consciousness, particularly in predominantly white spaces and institutional spaces, of wanting to know, wanting to be aware, wanting to do better, wanting to make amends. How might they better support this question of access and accessibility? How might they better support action in a way that is equitable to those who've been historically marginalized? And then finally, how might they, and I say they because historically they've had a greater amount of resources. And then finally, how might they contribute to the preservation and honoring of what you just said, the institutions that are not recognized as institutions? Maybe it's an auntie's home, right, or a church basement. Right. How might they activate in support?
Well, again, first of all, just do it. All right. So sometimes it's not rocket science, right? I mean, I don't know a major corporation that doesn't have a foundation. And it's now just the buzzword to talk about social justice and how we are interested in supporting social justice. So, extend the boundaries, extend the parameters of what's acceptable. Be a little more flexible in terms of who you decide to support and what is the criteria for supporting them. The Holocaust Museum, the Black Holocaust Museum in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, I don't know if they're still open or not, because they were struggling so much financially. But I do know that we need a Black Holocaust Museum in the U.S. You can call it something else. And of course, I love what Brian Stevenson did down in Montgomery. I mean, he is one of my favorite people right now. People tell me that I'm like a coarse, vulgar version of him. And I actually take that as a compliment because I have so much respect for him. But the fact of the matter is his project, because he has some capital that most African American, and especially working in communities, don't have the kind of personal and professional capital that he has. So we have to find a way to work with, like I said, the Black Holocaust Museum there. I love the examples that you gave. I mean, talking about, freeing up, having free time, maybe a couple, 3 hours on buses, but also the museums themselves, and then, we can talk all we want, but if every museum I go in, everybody is white, that's going to send a message. Now, I say that, I have white Americans working in my museum, and it makes sense. It's a racism museum, and racism is about race relations. And so that makes some sense. But, we have to find a way to, and I think corporations can help with this, and museums themselves can help with this in terms of, it's going to sound really trite, but growing museum professionals who are Black and brown, and putting that out there as a thing. I never took a museum course. I didn't know what that was, but I'm trying to find ways to support young professionals, in terms of, sending them to a conference, introducing them to my friends, helping them fill out grants, just the whole mentoring, coaching kind of thing. So there's a ton of things that people can do. But the first, when people always say, well, what is it we can do? My answer is always, you know what you need to do, because it's what you haven't been doing. And so let's do what you haven't been doing. Yes, and that's money, and that's putting people in positions where their thoughts can be implemented, or at least entertained and discussed. So just as, I don't want to quote Nike here, but just do it.
No, it makes perfect sense. And the only thing that I'd add to that is even start with having your board and your staff go through a diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion training. To me, just something as obvious as that. It's a small step, but like you said, just do it. We can all just do that. I really appreciate it. I'm selfish. I don't want it to end, but I know you are a terribly, terribly busy a man, and I'm just so grateful. The Calaboose African American Museum thanks you. In closing, I'd like to read a little bit of your bio, if that's okay. Again, we have just wrapped an awesome talk with Dr. David Pilgrim, who is a public speaker and one of this country's leading experts on issues relating to multiculturalism, diversity, and race relations. He is best known as the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum, a 14,000-piece collection of racist artifacts located at Ferris State University. The museum uses objects of intolerance to teach tolerance and promote social justice. And I have to say this, it's not in your bio, but I want to make sure that I highlight it. Your museum existed long before May 25th, 2020. The work that you and your staff and your team that you personally have been doing has been, you've been in the trenches. You've been in this work for decades. So I celebrate that. I'd also like to continue here. Dr. Pilgrim is an applied sociologist with a doctorate from The Ohio State and the author of Understanding Jim Crow and Watermelons, Nooses, and Straight Razors, published in 2015 and 2017, respectively. Please visit the website where you can also find his other writings, which is www.ferris, that's FERRIS.edu/Jim Crow. There's a wealth of information. The Calaboose African American History Museum must revere you and honor you. You helped to inform our exhibit, our current exhibit that we've had now for a year. I just think it's also important as we are growing museum professionals, and I don't think that's tried at all. I think that's a decolonial model. And I think we have to be intentional. And so as part of that effort, we would be remiss to not honor the fact that you helped to teach us in our own exhibit and the placards that we were able to put up, and crediting you, of course, by helping us to further understand the complexities of this history, our history. So thank you so much, Dr. Pilgrim. Hopefully we can do a part 2 one of these days. I would love to hear how that state-of-the-art facility comes about. Please let us know if there's information we can post on our website to get the word out. If you're doing a crowd funding, anything. Thank you so much. We appreciate you and we thank you. Please take care.
Thank you.
Anything you want to say in closing?
No, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm glad you invited people to the website. That would be good. Have a good day. I'm sure your parents, who are at least one or both of them, are Jarvis Christian College graduates.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're very proud of you, and I am too.
Well, thank you so much. I will let them know. I'll play that every time I get in trouble.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.